Welcome to All the Forbidden Things. This is the podcast where we talk about all the things we're not talking about, even with our closest loved ones and friends. In this episode, I have the very dear Mallory Patrick. And he is a friend of mine for years now. He is a very special guest because he is part of the inspiration for the format of the show and the conversations that we're having on here. There was one day a while ago, probably a year ago now, I actually looked through some of our conversations and we were talking about this in November of last year. And I think before that even. But one day I was pondering my struggle with the patriarchy and that I had some internalized feelings of like, actually, the world might be better if men did keep running it, and some weird stuff that was going on in my head. And Mallory and I have always shared some of our deepest, darkest, and brightest parts of ourselves. So I felt safe to share that feeling with him. And I really went out on a limb and I asked him the question, do you ever have anything similar as a Black man in America in a world that's not set up for you? So then we got off to the races on a beautiful discussion back and forth about kind of our backgrounds, our viewpoints, and things that we just never knew we never knew. Really, I think a lot of it was too. So anyway, I am so thrilled to have you as a guest on here. And I think we can just dive on into it because we're so good at that.
I think we will. I don't mind the first and middle name because that is how I identify with my art, just out of respect for my dad, who I've patched things up with. I go by all three names, so Mallory Patrick Pollard. But I echo every sentiment that you just said, and yeah, I'm ready to dive in. Let's just go for it, Rebecca.
So do you want to start us off with that kickoff question, the fun question?
Yeah. We'll get an easy icebreaker going. Rebecca, what do you think my favorite type of dessert food is, just categories wise? Cake, pie, cookie,
Pie.
pastry. Okay.
I somehow think pie, but then the second you said the word cookie, it started to resonate. So I'm gonna go with pie, backup answer cookie. I think you probably appreciate a really good definitely a very well, like perfectly sort of crispy, but also melty, like chocolate chip cookie kind of thing. But I can see you being an appreciator of like a specialty cookie someone's made. I don't know.
It's all accurate. I mean, I think the answer is everything. It was a trick question, and one that I left out. I danced around and left out intentionally. Is probably brownie. I like a good but yeah, I definitely. There's a pastry chef. They did that what Netflix Chef's Table, and they did a pastry episode for Christina Tosi, and she runs it's Milk. She has a location here in LA, but she does. Oh man, I'm gonna get the name of them wrong. So, but they're basically it's called the compost cookie. So you are correct. That is one of the best cookies I've had in my life. She throws chocolate and graham and peanut butter. There's all kind of mess in there. So, yeah, that is correct.
What do you think my favorite dessert is?
Okay. Um, because you went pie first, I'm gonna go pie. No, you're a cake girl or something. Yeah.
It is no. I think what was happening is as you were listing them out, I was thinking about what I really wanted right now, and pie was part of the equation. But yeah, no, I would say I really do love cake. I love cake oriented things. I'm gluten free, so if it's a good gluten free cake, then yes. But I also love like a chocolatey melting in the middle chocolatey cake. Chocolate.
Oh,
Thanks. Now let's get to some of the real. I am going to invite
uh-oh.
you to ask a question again as the first question because you had that, what did you call it? A nice broad. You almost said it as if it
Yeah.
was like not too deep, and it's very
It
deep.
wasn't deep. It wasn't. It was like kiddie pool. We're just going to start broad and probably get more specific. Um, okay. I almost, I, listeners, I podcast as well. So it's taking everything out of, it's taking everything in me, I should say, to not podcast host this. This is Rebecca's podcast. So let me get that out of the way, everybody. Um, but based on your format, okay, here was the kiddie pool question. Um, what do you think my overall perception is of white women? We're going there.
Okay. Okay, great. Because so when I asked you about this the first time around, when we first had our
Yeah.
conversation, one of the things that came out of it was this phrase, white princesses, which I swear to God, I had never heard in my life. It's probably just one of those things that gets whispered as soon as I leave the room. But I did not know what it was. And then when you
Right.
told me, I was like, "Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a thing. That makes sense." And I actually want to ask you in a minute here what you think my feelings are about that term and whether I relate to it or not. But as far as you are concerned, I think that when I would say if and when you come across a real white princess, you have a very strong reaction to that. that is fairly negative.
Oh man.
Um,
Okay.
I would say I don't know that actually. That's that's a guess, but
Yeah.
that's my that would be my assumption. And then I would also think though that in general you do, and we'll talk about this more. And you
Yeah.
and I have talked about it, but this kinship between Black men and white women, where there's just there's something we seem to know about each other or feel about each other that that there's a real friendship and tenderness available there. So I think that you feel that a lot of the times with women that you respect. Um, but I'm sure there are these people that stick out like a sore thumb that you probably are like, not. Ah.
That this is where, like I said, I don't want to host this, but because I'm trying to, I don't want to give backstory, but we know each other very well. I mean, we
Yeah,
have
no,
shared
that's
about these things already. So your
unavoidable.
answer, yeah, your answer is spot on because we did talk about this, and I first have to say that the white princess phrase, I give credit to Hassan Minhaj for that. I did not coin that. And to be honest, it isn't necessarily a term that floats around amongst other black men, or at least in
Mm.
the circle of black men I've been around. But Hassan Minaj said it was Homecoming King. This is from many years ago. He had a Netflix special that was almost like stand-up comedy, and he is Indian, obviously. Or if I get that wrong, we're going to keep it in, and Hassan Minaj can just dislike me. But he basically talked about his experience of dating a white woman and some request she had asked of him. And he goes, "Of course, my white princess," and it clicked something for me, which was why I latched onto it, which, yes. So, how much history do you want me to get into? You want me to stay pretty present, or are we going all the way?
Well, are we talking your personal history or like cultural history overall?
Okay, all right.
No.
Let me
I'm
just,
just
yeah.
asking to clarify. What do you mean
Yeah, yeah,
historically?
yeah. Well, let's go historical with it because I think it was a really great conversation we had about that. So, I will say, and maybe of course, I'm only speaking from my perception, right? I'm not speaking for every other black man. But when we first talked about it, went all the way back to slavery. We went there, and we're going to go there right now, where there always, in my opinion, that relationship between black man and white woman probably began there, where to a black man, the slave master's daughter, the slave master's wife, was this like very forbidden fruit, right? Like that's a woman you don't even think about. And we can fast forward into civil rights era and more where, we're going to go there in this episode. Sadly, like the stories like of Emmett Till, where young black men lost their lives for having some sort of interest in or kinship with white women. So there's been times where it's just been flat out inappropriate for a black man to see a white woman in such ways. So it then gets flipped, right, in the mind of a black man that it's like, oh, well, this is forbidden fruit. So what does everybody want with forbidden fruit? They want it more. So I think that's where it kind of comes from, and we can get into white male patriarchy and how this world works. So the idea that a white woman then becomes a trophy, something that is unattainable, so there's a lot of layers there.
Mhm.
So I think I'll just stop for now on that of saying like that's kind of I think where the phrasing and the term of white princess goes. I do remember your other side of that answer, so now I'm going to get into it. As far as seeing white women of the world and some of like kind of the eye rolling, I think that's truthful as well. And that's something that has come up. I don't know what's going on with me. Am I getting more bitter as I get older? What is it, Rebecca? Where I can admit there are ways that maybe white women express themselves in public or on television shows or things like that, which can be very joyous and free and almost carefree in a way that as a black man does make me jealous at times. Where it's like, wait a
Mm.
minute, I'm not allowed to be that emotional. I'm not allowed to, almost be that flippant. There are a lot of situations I'm in where it's like, wow, I feel like the black man who must be dutiful and professional and righteous, where I could let loose in some ways I see white women do, but I feel like, oh, I might be judged, in that capacity. So I think I'll end my answer there, because yeah, we've already gotten in deep. I told you about
Wow.
slavery already.
So I was just thinking about this earlier. My friend put me onto this TikTok account today. I think the guy's name is Jay. But he does like animal kind of rescue themed stuff, but he has these bits about like white women aren't afraid of anything. Like if you
Mm,
need to get a bear taken out of your yard, he's like, I'm
mm,
telling everyone, I've been telling them forever, you need 5 white women's phone numbers at all
yep.
times in case you have a raccoon in the house. Um,
Yeah.
but he does a really hilarious job of that because my friend was saying, so she works in a workplace here where she is the only white person. And all of her friends are like, she was saying to us when she was, so she sent us this cute little thing of a raccoon outside her window, and then she's like, I just want to bring it inside and feed it. And then she's like, my friends at work would roast me so hard for this. They'd be like, Nicole, do not get near the raccoon, what are you doing? And then
Yeah.
our other friend sent this thing, and he has this really enjoyable humor because it's very loving towards white women, but it's also kind of, a little bit mocking, funny, humorous, but also in this very like just delightfully loving way where one doesn't take offense and you're like, oh my God, you just nailed the voice and everything. And they're really, really, really hilarious videos. But before I even saw those, my thought was when she said that, I think I wrote back in the group like, yeah, getting ourselves into unnecessary trouble and places we don't belong. But it is really interesting how, in some ways, in the world today, white women are the most privileged people on the planet, or at least in America. And we enjoy freedoms, like you're saying, this feeling of free that is so unhindered. And that and to the point in which it's extremely toxic and this is kind of a whole side conversation we might not have time for today,
That's
but
okay. Yeah.
the female revolution and our anger and man hating and things like that, we have a reckless abandonment towards taking whatever we want, and also this sense that no violence done by a woman is true violence.
Yeah.
So we are actually extremely dangerous in pretending to be little lambs. A lot of times, though, we are like so under equipped to do even change a tire or things like that. I mean, it's the exact. It is truly, white princess is a very, very good term for it, honestly, because it is the exact type of thing of like an evil queen, that the ability she has to do whatever she wants, the danger that comes with that, and then the inability a lot of times to get down on the ground and, you know, clean something up, you know, or even know how do you use a hammer, you know. So
Yeah.
yeah. But so then that leads me kind of into the question of, what do you think my response is to the term white princess is based on you know, I gave away part of it, but like, get in a little
Right.
nitty gritty. What do you think my feeling is? And do I relate to it?
Right. You know, I mean, I'm not just going to gush on the podcast host here, but you are, you know, it's become such a dirty word, woke, you know, and it's a shame that that's become such a dirty word, because really all it means is to be aware. You know, I
Awake.
think it's,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It started with the idea of being awake, be awake to what's going on in the world around you, the social and political, you know, arena. And this is mainly civil rights era, right? But you have always been that. I've always respected you as that, of being so aware of these things. So I don't believe that you've ever consciously possibly fed into it for your own benefit in any way. And I really just, yeah, I just appreciate the awareness again that you have, that in a way, like, white women can play these cards, whereas other genders and possibly races can't in the same way. And I guess, I mean, if I don't know the format, you know, if I'm allowed to ask, what has your feeling on being a white female in that way? Have you perceived yourself as a white princess at times, or have you fed into it possibly?
Yeah. Yeah. So you did the format perfectly, which is that
Okay,
I get to answer after you answer. So here we go.
good.
Um, so on some level, it probably feels similar to how I would say probably the closest thing is like white men, and specifically within the male aspect of it, are like, everyone just assumes that they feel privileged, or
Mm,
that they're, you know, whatever. Like, everyone assumes that they want everything their way, or that they wouldn't want women to get ahead. And that's a caricature of a specific type of person. Okay, well, it's not a caricature. It's a role, or it's a place that's available for you to walk into.
right,
But most men that are worth hanging out with aren't going to walk into that room, and certainly not knowingly. There are a lot
right.
of guys that hang out in that room and never leave it. But there's a lot of men who actively try to avoid that room, or like aren't attracted to it. And the assumption that you would enjoy being in that room is it's that's insulting in and of itself, right? Oh, you must love power. So but I do love power. um so here's the thing is, this is where it takes that really difficult. Everybody's tired of people talking about white guilt, okay?
Sure.
But I am still I am still plagued by that experience. I do still have a struggle with relating to that. And I said that it was like this to someone. It's like if we were all in a movie and you're given a script and you have to play the person that's having a hard time. Okay. And everybody's got these roles, and there's this crazy stuff going on, and there's these people dying, and these other people in this terrible position. And then I look at my script and I'm the villain. I'm the one that's
Mm,
making it all happen. And I'm like, did I get typecast as this? Why am I playing the villain? Everyone in the movie hates me. I have to work really hard to try to establish trust with them. Everyone's like, why aren't you playing your character well enough? Like, that's what you're, well, of course you would dive in deep. Why do you feel that way? Like, why are you struggling owning that you've been cast as the villain? You know, and it's just like, I don't know, but all I want to do is hang out with everyone. And I don't know, it's uncomfortable, it's psychologically challenging at times to know, because the dissonance between how you really feel about people and how you've been cast and what's expected of you, and this guilt that you come carrying in with that is placed upon you, is so confusing psychologically and so upsetting, and it's actually feels impossible to resolve. because the act of speaking about it, the act of speaking about the desire to connect, the act of speaking about the upset of that, the act of speaking a lot of times at all about race is also prohibited. So
Yep.
I just have to wander around the world bumbling around as this character I don't understand and can never seem to play right. And I'm supposed to have a character development where I end up getting forgiven and I don't know what I did wrong. So that is a thing where the white princess thing, similar to a Karen or something like that, is a role in a movie. It's not that villain role that I'm talking about, but it is a type of a role in the movie that's maybe a bit of a comedic relief, but you're like, oh my God. It doesn't feel good to be cast as that unless you've been acting that way, right? You're like, wait a second, I didn't think, but in reality, it's the same thing with kind of color blindness, and we'll talk about that maybe a little bit too, but only white people can afford to be colorblind, right? So it's that thing where you are so in it, you don't know you're doing it. So much of my life is probably about race, and I have no idea. To me, it's just how people should be. And some people don't get to be a certain way or not. And then I'm upset about that and want to help them. But to me, it's just being a person. So if I'm like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna kind of like waltz in here and ask for something and hope that like I don't have to pay for the fix on my car. I'm not calculating my race into the equation at all. I have no idea that it exists. I could be a purple dinosaur. So that's the interesting thing, is it is always a little bit like, oh, did I end up in that room where all those people are hanging out being assholes and I didn't realize it because I thought that was the living room? Like, that's the thing that I think we do have to sit with and go, well, maybe it's happening and you don't know that it's happening. So that does occur.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That was so perfect. And I'm not even, there's so many things I could start to latch onto to follow up, but I know there's questions that you want to get to. Sadly, like the only follow up I'll have is somewhat a little comical. It's like you're cursed. And I've shared this with you before. You're cursed with being a beautiful white woman as well, Rebecca. And that's not to flatter. You know, it's like there is so much that goes into that. Your look fits into certain beauty standards, right? You know, there's actresses that look like you. There's models on billboards that look like you. So that feeds into it also. So I just applaud you for everything you just said because it was very on point. And I guess maybe the one thing I will follow up with, I really loved.
Please follow.
The analogy of playing a role. I loved also. Thank you. This is cathartic for me. You know, saying that people of color can't afford. They're not allowed to be colorblind. And so that does start to speak into a little bit of my history. I know you do want to get into our perceptions of race as it were in the past, but I'll just quickly touch on it right now to say, like, yeah, I did go through that experience with people that I considered friends, where my race, for no reasons whatsoever, you know, would be brought to the surface, whether that's through some kind of joke or some kind of offhand comment. And that was my first lesson of understanding, like, yeah, I have to be a black man in this world because someone's going to remind me of it, whether that was on the table or not. So I'll leave it at that for now. Yeah.
Well, I mean I mean, you don't have to, because the the that is like, I mean, it's similar to the in the movie. It's as if like somebody's pointing out what your outfit is every time, in every line, in everything. Or like, oh, you're this particular quality about you. It's just like constantly that's what's going on in the movie. That's also, I mean, you know, obviously, well, this is the other thing. Isn't your experience worse than mine? Isn't it so much worse to be the victim than the villain? But I think we have an interesting perspective on this, right, Mallory? You know, really quick, very light background for people. Mallory and I were in a support group. We've gone through some similar things. One of the things that we've talked about and that we learned about is acting like a victim, taking responsibility for our lives and stuff like that. And I think Um, I can speak from the perspective of a woman. That's a really huge theme right now. Women acting like kind of victim-y and like, oh, our arrows don't hurt because we just deserve to just keep beating back for all of time. So I mean, I'd be interested to kind of get into that with
Yeah.
you in terms of does one think it is harder to be a victim or a villain in any, let's take out whether it's race or gender or whatever, but on
Right.
what level are there challenges? Because clearly some people are really struggling with the villain role in life, be it
Oh
men or
my.
whatever.
Yeah, that's a big one. And I'm not sure when you're going to publish this, but we've got an election coming up, right? And oh yeah, casting people as villains is just commonplace now, right? Without us getting into the red and blue of it all. Um, it's a great question, Rebecca, and I'm just going to chatter a little more until I formulate my answer because that hit deep for me. Feeling like I have been both, and it's hard to extract the race from that.
Mm.
Um, I would say, as my little pen went into my video,
I
everyone.
know I've got a pencil waving
Yeah,
around.
yeah, yeah. This is great. My heart is going towards victim more than villain. And for me, I have to talk about race. That's why I'm here, right? I mean,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the challenge so much, I think, being black is you have to dance this fine dance between understanding history, whether that's just in the broad sense, like what our country has gone through when it comes to race, and then with your own family, what traumas did you come from as they related to race. Wanting to have that vision of who you want to become and to excel and to succeed. And if I walk into the room as the black man, immediately I was disadvantaged. Immediately I am a victim.
Mm.
That stings a little bit more than walking into the room as a black man who might steal something because he's the villain, right?
Wow.
Yeah, that stings for me. I can't speak for for every black person, but for me, the idea of, oh, you went to college? What kind of assumption is this? Because I'm black, my family wouldn't have come from enough means for me to go to college. Oh, what a victim. What a poor black person, right? Um, I mean, we can talk about grief and loss and things like that, but that has played into it as well. I lost my mother in 2012, and I like to think of myself as a resilient person. That support group we were, met in has helped me get past those things. But there's something about being cast as this role of, oh, he's just this poor dude who lost his mom. That stings a little bit more because I'm black. So give me a little credit for being resilient. There's so much that I can get past, and there's more that I can do. So I think I'll stick with that for now. I think the microaggressions that come with assumptions, it's called from the white community, that I'm disadvantaged in certain ways. I've had the assumption thrown at me that was your dad around? Things like that. It's like, wow. So there's perception, in my opinion, from white people that like, wow, a black person immediately equals a victim. It's hard. Again, it's a tightrope to walk because, yeah, there's truth to that. My dad came from dirt poor Alabama. Like there is some truth that there's some things that my family has had to work through generations, but don't immediately cast us as that. Be able to see me on a wavelength of being able to accomplish and not that I'm just a victim.
Wow.
That, yeah. Okay.
You know, you answered that in a different way than I expected because as a woman, the being of the victim is very much
Right.
a
Right.
self-defined experience a lot of the time. In
Yes.
fact, the reverse is really true.
Yeah.
You walk in the room, people think, as a woman, one walks into the room and people don't believe that something bad happened to you.
Hmm.
um, so that
This is a
is
great
is it
episode.
is
I'm
it
going
an
to say it.
interesting thing too? Like, are you part of a group that is trying to take that identity off? And what's the difference between, feeling something that's imposed upon you and reveling in something yourself, right? But what really spoke to me about what you said was just, I never thought about that feeling of Like I could definitely conceive of, and I'm sure I was definitely aware of the idea that like if somebody acts like, oh wow, you went to college, good for you, that would be exceptionally insulting. But what kind of kills me about what you said is it's difficult not to think of Blackness itself as something that's hard for you because I know
Right.
how easy whiteness is. Deep
Mm,
down inside, even if I can't see my experiences or how it's playing out in my life, I have learned about what we as a group historically, and not even my ancestors, but they're all your ancestors because they're experienced as your ancestors. And you know what I mean? Like
right.
it's, but what we as a group have done to your group, I
Yeah, man.
can't forget. Because I mean, and this is the other weird thing about white guilt is somebody did it. I mean, I'm perfectly willing to ask for forgiveness for judgments that I get wrong or things that I'm doing wrong or even ignorance that I should be responsible for. But to have to pay for someone else's sins is impossible. And it gets
Right.
you stuck in a cycle where it's very difficult to forget. So, but I know they happened. And just as much as when people look at me, they might see my ancestors, I see yours, you know,
Mm,
and you can't erase the compassion and empathy that comes from knowing what happened, what is happening, what exists. So it's difficult to not experience people with some level of, I think the difference is it pity or is it empathy?
thanks.
um and that's the thing, which that takes a little bit of learning to know how to do. But I think once we empathize with people, we pity them less because we understand them. Pity is something you do from the outside, from over here looking down,
Yes.
um but I never
You're
really
nailing
thought
it.
about that, how much that would be so frustrating and upsetting.
No, and the beauty of our friendship is coming out in this conversation because I already want to follow up with something really great with that. Because your podcast, what we are doing, in my opinion, is the solution
Mhm.
where I can rewind and remember back to 2020 pandemic, and then George Floyd happens. And God bless my white friends. They participated in posting that black box on their Instagram to show solidarity. We can't have this happening to black men or black people in general. And then I ended up just so quickly getting rubbed the wrong way because a handful of white friends then started posting things that said, you need to read this book. Read this book about the black experience and about the black community. This is literature. These are websites you should go to empower yourself. Now, this may be one of those white perception things of like, well, I'm caring and I'm woke and I want people to learn more about the black community. So I'm going to share that there's resources to do it. And I so politely responded in a post and in a few comments of just talk to your black friends. Just do that. Because, and I'm not putting this on you at all, but you did say there is an education, and you're right. There is an education, but the way I learn about people and things is just do it one on one. Because what I think comes up in this whole conversation about is it pity or empathy? How do I reconcile if I'm a white person with someone's blackness? I don't know what they've been through. I don't know what's sensitive to them, all these things. Black people start to become something to be studied, and it takes our humanity away.
Mm.
I'm a person. I'm a person that came from two parents, and just talk to me. Talk to me one on one on an even keel. If you learn that I came from a lot of, hardship and trauma that makes me a victim, then so be it. But also keep listening to how I've come out of it. Maybe you'll learn I didn't come from that. Maybe you'll learn I'm a black person that came from a ton of wealth. There's black people that didn't come from slavery. So I just needed to follow up and say that in response to what you said of, I agree, there is an education that needs to happen. I would just say it needs to happen on a one-on-one level of just, don't be so afraid to, and again, this isn't going straight to you,
Yeah.
right? It's like,
No, but it
don't act
applies
like
to me.
black people. Yeah, it's like we're not something to be studied and examined. It's just we're people. Talk to us. Figure out what our favorite music is. How do our parents act at the holidays? And that'll be your education on what's right and wrong to say, like any other group of people, right?
This is music to my ears, but let me tell you, Mallory, that is not the message that white people get from, I don't
Uh,
know who's teaching us this stuff. It's probably Karen. But it's maybe it's a white woman, maybe it's whatever. But there is a message to the point in which after I sent you that initial message where I just asked you a simple
right,
question,
right.
I thought, like when you say something to a partner or something, you're like, this could be the end of the relationship, but I guess it has to be said. That was
Yeah.
what I felt in the hours. I don't know if it was a day. I think you responded the next morning or something, and I was like, I can breathe again. It felt like I had committed a crime against humanity, and I'm not
Oh,
joking. It felt like I don't know. It felt like it literally feels like an act of defying nature. That is how ingrained it is that this is not allowed to be asked about. This is not allowed to be talked about.
mm,
The idea that asking you makes me feel like I'm dehumanizing you, but I knew that it wouldn't. I knew because our relationship was so full of love and connection and honesty and authenticity that I knew that you wouldn't see it that way.
yeah.
And it just felt like it had to be done. But in most things, my perception until the Black Lives Matter movement, actually, my perception was that the best thing that could happen is for everyone to be colorblind. My
Yeah,
perception
yeah,
was that's what we ultimately want to get to. We don't ever want to
yeah.
have to see each other through the angle of race and blah, blah, blah. The best thing that I can bring to a room is treating us like
Mm,
we're all the same. That's the best experience. Then it became, I was dramatically changed by the Black Lives Matter movement for good in a very positive way. But it became this all the things you didn't know, and that was actually very real for me. But then there were people who said, all my white friends are asking me if I'm okay and what's going on with me and blah blah blah. And then it was like, oh god, I don't want to be that person to do that to someone's face if that's what they don't want. And then it's like, then I mean, it feels like this impossible thing to get out of, and it is so encouraging to hear, like, yeah, just ask me, talk to me, because it feels safer, so much safer to read a book and suggest a book than it does to ask a friend. You could risk a friendship, you could risk, I don't know, it feels like splitting a curtain of humanity.
mm,
And whether or not it feels good at some point in time, and I mean, that's what this project is about, is you can't really know someone unless you know some of these things.
mm.
Maybe less of a yes or no, but how much do you think I think racism is still a thing?
I believe you, Rebecca Louise Davis. I believe that you believe racism is still a thing. And now the questions are, I guess, follow up questions are, where do we believe that manifests?
Mhm.
Social situations, love, dating, professionalism, all the above. And then the broader follow up question with that is, do white people as a whole believe that racism is still a thing? I'm jumping
Yeah.
ahead. It's
Well,
kind of
let
like
me
the
let me
punchline
try to
already.
answer some of those. So,
Okay.
um, I think any white people I know think that racism is still a thing.
Okay.
I would also say, I mean, I do think the Black Lives Matter movement 2020 had a huge impact on white awareness of whiteness. Um, Again, for me, it was just like, oh my God, this is a thing. I think before that, I actually didn't think it was as much of a thing. I thought
Yeah.
that you and all of my friends, like maybe in metropolitan cities, I thought it existed maybe in the South, but I didn't think that this was a theme that was actively running through your life. I thought, oh, if you're not getting racial slurs, if you're not getting jobs, if you're not whatever, it's not a thing. And that's way less of a thing now. So for me, it was almost like we had this historical spirit in the air between us. But I really didn't, I have to say, I really didn't know how much of an ever present presence it was. Then when people started talking about, I think it was accounts of their lives, accounts of like what it's like to walk around the world on a regular basis in this body, it was like, oh my God. And then of course the police and the violence aspect and all of that and the lack of protection. So now I think that racism is still a thing. And I've also begun to understand in a much richer way how much it unfortunately runs through our veins. But ironically, because it doesn't, you know what I mean? It's
Yeah,
the worst of the markers because it represents nothing. But in many ways, for many lives, it defines almost everything. And that is
sure.
why I find it so perverse.
Hmm. That's perfectly said, my friend. And I love how you touched on white guilt, earlier, because I try to zoom out as much as I can to see both sides on this particular issue. And some part of me does feel bad for white people on that issue because of the lineage of our country, right? And not being on that other side of it per se. You can get into different ethnic groups, talk about the Irish were, discriminated against in Massachusetts, Boston. There have been subsections of white Americans that have been discriminated against. But I believe that the difference in those, like you said, the marker of it is white people have not known it overall,
Mm.
whereas black people, and I'm hopefully I help here. That to me the divide is, to say it bluntly, Rebecca, black people have PTSD.
Mm.
And so when it comes to the racism thing, hopefully, and I don't want to get into the political right, hopefully we all agree that slavery was a thing. Hopefully we all agree that Reconstruction right after slavery was a thing. Hopefully we all agree that, the Jim Crow era was a thing. So I've always, those are the markers of absolutely racism was a thing. We can't deny it. And again, there's people that are trying to have revisionist history about that, which is crazy. So when it comes to this question of is it a thing or not, I have to admit as a black person, racism, it's a concept, it's an idea in one's mind that then turns into actions, right? So then in those eras of time I was talking about, the action was we're going to put laws in the book that are clearly racist. Black people can't do this, can't own this, can't go here, can't vote, can't, right? That's clearly racism in this country. Now I'm talking politically, right, and socially. But what happens after you get the Civil Rights Act, you start to, and affirmative action, which is a whole different thing, right? But you start to have these things that say, well, black people are free, black people can vote, black people can apply for XYZ job. We get into this muddy area now where, okay, it's not about actions that are on books anymore. I can't look at racism and say, well, it's clearly because of this law that racism's happening. The question now is it in someone's mind, right? And I admit as a black person, and I would like my community to do the same, I can neither prove or disprove if someone is racist. I can't do it. I can never prove what you're thinking. So I apologize for getting into so many different avenues of my answer here or response.
No,
But
that's the point. That's the point.
okay, when I touched on the idea, and this is cathartic for me, by the way, when I touched on the idea of PTSD, I did think about this morning before coming into this episode. I wanted to be able to get on a soapbox and talk about this.
Mm.
I think about my mother's side of the family. She grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So here we have factual racism, can't deny it. There was Black Wall Street. Forgive me if I get the year wrong. I believe it was 1914. Domestic terrorism. White people came in and burned down this area of Tulsa, Oklahoma that was known as Black Wall Street. Essentially just thriving, affluent black business. And white people just said, yep, we're jerks. We're going to tear this down. Racism, flat out, can't call it anything else. My mother's family is from Tulsa, as I just said. So my mother herself was only, what, one or two generations removed from a very literal racist act that's undeniable. So what do you think my family and my side of the family said about racism? It's real. It's a thing, right? So then fast forward to my mother being a young woman who probably somewhere in the early 80s wants to go and buy a Mercedes Benz. She just walks into a Mercedes dealership. This is all factual. And she just likes the look of this Mercedes sedan. And the dealer essentially says, oh, no, you can't afford that. You're not going to buy that car. So here we go. We have another marker, right? Is that racism? There's no law in the land that says my mother can't buy that car because she's black. So by law, there's no racism going on here. But what was in his mind? This is where the PTSD of Black people kicks in. It says, no, wait a minute. We come from all this horrible history of things that were factually racist and actually happening to Black people. So when you fast forward to the 80s and you say, wait a minute, a dealer doesn't want to sell me a car, this is where it gets foggy. The white dealer can just say, I didn't think that she could afford it. Well, why didn't you think she could afford it, right? We get into that cloudy back and forth where my mother's perception as a Black woman was, this is racist because you don't want me to own this car. Whereas the white dealer can feign innocence. There's nothing legal going on here that's saying it's racism. So then you fast forward to me, obviously one generation removed from my mother because I'm her son. I, Rebecca, can be grateful to say I can count on one hand all the times in my entire life I've been called an N-word. Shouldn't have happened any of the times. So I can say I'm of a millennial generation, we're around the same age, where I haven't experienced racism directly very much, where it's very obvious I'm being ostracized or limited because I am Black. But I still have the same PTSD from generations before that was handed down to me because of my family's experience. And here I am sitting in Pasadena, California, for context. When I walk to this co-working space I'm currently sitting in, and I see the young white girl who comes out of her apartment and turns right back around to make sure her door is locked, just as she's passing me on the street, what am I supposed to think? Can I prove that she is racist and did that because I'm Black? No. I'll never know her mind. But the PTSD from my heritage says some part of me thinks it was racist. So, I just wanted to get on my soapbox and say that, but obviously it's in tune with the conversation, and that's why I baited the question. Is for white people, it's like you said, it's so much easier to have that colorblind innocence to say, well, y'all aren't in slavery anymore. There's no Jim Crow going on anymore. You can vote and you can own cars and you can do all these things. So what are you talking about that there's racism? Whereas the Black experience, and I loved you touching on like hearing people's stories. I love your format, and I am curious to know like where we might go next now.